Welcome everyone to Zoom into Books this afternoon. We're very excited to start a new workshop series with multi-international award-winning author Don Helin. He has written 7 thrillers and 3 memoirs. Today, he will be conducting a workshop about writing short stories, and we are very excited about this workshop because there is a new competition this year, the Next Generation Short Story Awards, and it is a not-for-profit international awards program for authors of short stories. It's brought to you by the Next Generation Indie Book Awards, which is the largest book awards program in the world for independent publishers and authors, and the Independent Book Publishing Professionals Group. Don, welcome to Zoom into Books.
Well, thank you so much, Kathy. I'm delighted to be here, and I look forward to our presentation. I'd like to just take a little time to kind of share with my writer friends a little bit about the Next Generation Indie Book Award, because I was surprised to think about the fact that my goodness, I've been involved with that group. Gosh, for almost 10 years. I remember back in 2014, I was just really getting going on my thriller writing career. Because many of you know, I started out as a travel writer and learned from a workshop that was done by the Washington Post. And then I moved to suspense novels and I began writing novels. And at that time, it was hard to break in. And I was lucky to get a great publisher who helped me break in. And we submitted my first book, Secret Assault, that we had done for an Indie Book Awards. And I won. I won the Best Suspense Novel 2015 and got my citation. And you say, well, you know, what does that mean? Well, you know, it means a lot, because I like to think of the Next Generation Indie Book Awards as for the little guy. You know, this is for the independent writer, independent publisher, people who may not have a whole line behind them. And so I was delighted when I heard that the Indie Book Awards was going to go into writing short stories and to try to help writers learn a little more about writing short stories, and at the same time reward them. You know, if you're in a program where you can write a story and have somebody that cares and is interested review it, and you get an award for it, I mean, what a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. That's why I'm such a fan of the Next Generation Indie Book Awards. And when I heard last a year that, or earlier this year, excuse me, that they were doing a short story program, a short story program, I thought, boy, what a terrific start, because a lot of writers are overwhelmed by trying to do a novel. And they say, well, maybe I can just start with a short story. And I would say that's a great place to start. And really, it's to celebrate the best short story writing. And it's inaugural year coming up now, and entries are open and will be until February for short stories of 5,000 words or less. And you say, do I qualify? And I have to say, are you an author in Canada, the United States, or even internationally that is going to write a 5,000 word short story, 5,000 words or less? And yes, you're certainly involved. And as I mentioned, the entries are going to be reviewed. You have until February to get your short story in. And what are the possibilities? I'll tell you, there are 25 categories and maybe even a couple more. I took a look, and they range from mystery to all different kinds of stories, and it's listed on the internet. So you can go to the Next Generation Indie Book Awards, the short story program, and get what and review what exactly you need to do, where you need to send your material. And I was interested enough, because it's been so important to me to have an award and be rewarded for your works. And I have critiqued and worked with a lot of people who write short stories. And sometimes I know that there is not really a lot of tension, something to pull me into this short story. And so I would hope that as we work our way through these workshops, we can learn how to do that. Now, let's what you want to start when you're working on a short story or a novel, and sometimes I would say sometimes even the other nonfiction, you can start. And where do you start? And you can start with a premise, and that's something that I think that we can look at. And let's see if I can get this up. Okay. Now, what you want to do is I'm sorry, I thought I would have that up. And
Dawn, you are sharing your screen. You just need to start the slideshow.
oh, there it is, the play. I was trying to, there it is.
Yeah.
I was trying to I was trying to find the play, and I couldn't come up with it.
That's
okay,
good.
Let's step back for a minute. You know, I talk about, and maybe it's because I write suspense novels or whatever, but I think the suspense and the what we're trying to do is to pull readers in. And I have a number of friends who write short stories, and I've had a chance to review some of those. And much of the time, I kind of feel that they're a little flat. And because they don't have the power of good critiquing and good tension. So let me just quote a couple of very famous writers, and they can be talking about short stories, they can be talking about novels, but it's all a way to do something to pull your reader into the story. Many of you have read Karen Slaughter's, one of her books, several of her books. She's got like 35 million books written in 37 languages. I mean, an incredible woman. And she says, I think it's kind of interesting, because here's where we're going to start. She said, a lot of people have fantastic ideas for stories, and we all do. But, she says, sitting down and figuring out how that idea is going to work, how the characters are going to interact, and how the plot's going to move forward, all that stuff is the business of being a writer. So it's just not a matter of having that idea, but you got to do something with it, and you have to know what you're doing. And this is what I'm hoping that we will help you. James Scott Bell, who's another terrific writer, he's got another point that's very interesting. He said structure, and we're going to talk about structure. But he says structure is the transition software. I really like that, the transition software for your imagination. So it's going to help you. You have an idea, but turning that raw material, it's not simply putting some words down on a piece of paper. You have to translate it into a form that readers can relate to, and structure will help you. Now, this sounds very simple, but it's not at all. He said every story has to begin and end, while the middle must hold the reader's attention. And that sounds so easy, but believe me, it's not. So the beginning of a novel, what are we trying to accomplish? It tells us first who the main character is and introduces the situation. One of the most famous books is To Kill a Mockingbird. And in that, we have Atticus Finch is defending a black man who's accused of raping a white girl. So in the introduction, you've got his character and a little bit of the challenge. Then we learn the stakes. Death for the black man, and if Finch fails to tell his story. So you've got everything, you've got conflict, you've got terrific problems, and shows how hard it's going to be. So you've got to ask yourself, have you given the reader a character who's worth following? Created problems for that reader at the beginning and established the stakes. So I'm going to just step back, if you don't mind, for a minute. Many of you have heard about the archetypes of conflict. And I'd like to just kind of review that, and I think it may help you pigeon where you're going to be. Right now, there are 6 archetypes of conflict with character. Characters have got to reveal themselves when they are tested, their thoughts and feelings, and more importantly, their action. So let's look at these 6 archetypes. I know archetype's a big word, but it's really, when you think about it, it's pretty simple and it makes sense. The first archetype of character fission, conflict, is man versus self. And what does that mean? That means something that's going on inside of me and I'm fighting that. Now, what sort of examples do we have of man versus self? How about an addict? How about somebody who's fearful, somebody who's guilty, somebody who has PTSD or whatever? They have their own emotions, seem to be holding themselves in check. So man versus self is something, and I'll show where you can put that in to add that pressure on your character. And you know what that'll do? That will make their readers feel for him and want him to work, want to be able to do what he's trying to do. So let's do man versus man. Okay. What is that archetype all about? Could be mysteries, man versus man, good guy, bad guy. Could be thrillers. So many of our writings are man versus man. And of course, it's women versus women. So now let's suppose that, like Robert Parker, many of you have read many of his books. And some of you, I know, I love his character, Jesse Stone. And Jesse is always man versus man, because he's put in a position where he's got to solve a crime. But inherent inside of that, man versus man, is man versus self, because he's an alcoholic. So he has to overcome these problems. He has a failed marriage that's just almost destroying him. And while he's solving the mystery, which he does very well, people still say, Jesse, you've got to pull yourself together. And the reader's going to do the same thing. They're going to like Jesse. They're going to want him to succeed because he's got this problem of man versus self. He's just punishing himself. Another detective that's one of my favorites is Harry Bosch, who was David Baldacci. And Bosch is an incredible detective, does a wonderful job. But because of his personality, and he doesn't put up with anything from anybody, he's always in trouble. And probably right on the edge of losing his job. As a fact, one of the books I just finished, Harry has lost his job as a New York detective, and now he's helping solve cold cases in a small town. So he's solving those cold cases, but the reason he's where he is because he's had problems with other people. So this can be really important to resolve and make the reader feel good about the character. The next archetype is man versus society. And this, of course, is your science fiction. There's a governing society that oversees everything. And that's the conflict. Man's trying to resolve that. One of the biggest conflicts is man versus nature. And what is that? It might be a whale. It might be the Titanic. The nature has put them in all that problems. And at the same time, we have man versus nature. We also have man versus self, because if you saw the movie or read the book, each of those people have their own challenges. So everybody has their own challenge. Now, the other two are man versus technology, and that was for a long time as robots. But now, how about artificial intelligence? You could have man versus technology and a problem with artificial intelligence, and internally, people having trouble dealing with that or believing what they read. And the other is man versus fate, or kind of a supernatural. So what I want you to think about as you're developing your character is, which of these archetypes are you hoping to use? Is it man versus self? Is your character much of the problem? Or is it man versus, let's say, nature? He's out in a hurricane, but yet he's having problems himself. So let's just think about that and put that on the shelf a little bit, and move forward with what I hope will be a high quality premise. Okay. Now, I know I'm kind of moving along a little bit, but I'm trying to get all this in, and we certainly got time for questions at the end. Okay, the premise is a great way to start a story. What you're always trying to do is, first of all, you've got the stasis, which is kind of the steady state. If you notice, most times a story begins where things are just happening. And that is where you want to start, because what you're going to do is turn that upside down. So you've got a steady state, but you're going to, reader kind of knows they're ready to hang on because they feel you're coming up with something pretty good. So remember when we were talking about what you need to start your story? You need your character. So motivation of your character is absolutely critical. Your reader has to understand what motivates your character. And what I like to say is I like to use the term when I'm dealing with characters deficiency. But it's really not a deficiency. It's the fact that we're people. For example, my series character, Colonel Zach Kelly, he's not a Superman. He's not superhuman because that would make him not believable. And what challenges, it's probably a better word than deficiency, what challenges does he have? One, he has a moderate case of post-traumatic stress disorder that he's gotten from his years in Afghanistan and Iraq. And so when he is going along and trying to solve whatever is going on, he might have a flashback. That's something he has to deal with. But probably his biggest challenge is his wife got to be using drugs. She ended up in jail. So his 18-year-old daughter is all of a sudden coming to live with him. Now, if any of you have been blessed with daughters, which I have 3 beautiful daughters, you realize that they don't always see things your way. So when the character's way, so when Zach is trying to save the world, to handle whatever he's facing, because he works for the president's national security advisor, he's working like mad. He's got to go to a meeting, and all of a sudden he gets a phone call. He said, Dad, remember, you promised you'd come and teach coach my soccer team. So all of a sudden, now he's got to figure out what he's going to do. So we have a man versus man, which is somebody, let's suppose what Zach's trying to stop is a bombing. So we got man versus man because somebody's trying to bomb something and Zach's trying to stop it. But internally, and it's almost like a secondary plot, internally, we got man versus self. Why? Because Zach is torn. He's trying to figure out how in the world I can do all this other stuff. Well, at the same time, take care of my daughter. And he's trying to show her how happy he is that she's there. And he's trying to show her that he wants her to be there and she's important. But how does he spread that? And I think everybody understands it because we've all been there. I've had times where I worked 3 tours, almost 10 years in the Pentagon. And there were many times that I was faced with, in the Pentagon, they say everybody works a half day. That's 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So, and it's not considered to be good form and promotion enhancing if you start bugging out all the time. So you got a mission and you're trying to do it and you get that phone call. Dad, remember me? You promised that you would be here to do this with me, to take me to the store, to do that, particularly as a single parent, how that magnifies that secondary plot or that challenge that he's facing. So remember, as we talk about plots, be thinking about the plot of one, the man versus himself, person versus himself is probably better. or person versus other person, and how we can put those together to build what? To build more conflict, because you have more conflict. So that makes the reader want the guy to succeed, wants the hero to succeed. So that's what we're trying to do with the steady state and the archetypes. And I know that I may have thrown something in there. I'm not sure if you ever heard of that, but it's something I always think about, because conflict is critical to a good story. And whether you're writing a flash fiction, or you're writing a short story, or you're writing a novel, whatever, you need conflict if you're going to make it go. Okay, so what we've done here now, we know we have a steady state. There's something going on. And let's just take one that you may be familiar with. Let's say that in the steady state, our hero is the chief of police in a small town, and he's brand new. Okay, and the steady state is he's trying to learn his job. He's trying to get next to people. He's trying to understand what's going on. So now we want the quest. Something is blocking our hero, our protagonist, from accomplishing his quest. Let's say in our case, he wants to protect swimmers who are out swimming because there's been an alert that there's sharks in the water. So he's saying, we better not send people out. Well, the small town group says, wait a minute, it's the 4th of July. This is the height of our tourist season. You just don't understand that we cannot pull all those swimmers in. They have to go out. So the quest is that the conflict is building for our protagonist, because he's trying to convince these people that we need to do something, and we need to fix that and be careful. We can't allow somebody to get hurt. Then the next step is there's a constant pressure and response. Pressure and response as your conflict grows. For example, in our case, the pressure is from the town people who want the swimmers to be able to go out and enjoy the water, enjoy the 4th, and of course, they're enjoying the funding and the money they're making. Now, the response from our chief of police is he doesn't want that to do. He's worried. So what happens if somebody gets hurt? And it builds and it builds till finally we have what we call the change bomb. And that's the critical choice that happens with the chief of police, because somebody is bitten and killed by a shark. So all of a sudden, the people are all over him. Hey, you got to do something. You got to get rid of that shark. The pressure continues to build. And then that continues to grow until we end up with the reader and the character making a critical choice. How is he going to resolve that? And then eventually they're able to resolve it. So that's kind of the story. What you want to do is have conflict, and there's so many different types of conflict. Could we have had a conflict in this story about a hurricane coming? That's man versus nature. And they're afraid that if the hurricane comes, people might die. Yet the town may still say, well, let them swim. We want our money. We want them to be here. We want this to happen. And we say, no, what if that hurricane strikes? Or what if the storm strikes? There's all kinds of things in nature. So what do we have here? We have man against nature. And you might end up with many. For example, in the conflict crisis, you may have man against man, the chief of police against the city, or you might have man versus self. He's trying to internalize, how in the world can I do this? I don't want to lose my job. I don't want everybody to be angry at me. And then you have a bad storm. So we've got man against nature. So man against nature is striking with a shark. Man against nature could be striking with a hurricane. And you are the writer. You can create this situation. But what you want to do is make sure that you walk through these steps. You start out some sort of status, and you tell us about your character. And we want to understand what makes this character. We're this chief of police that we know in that small town wants to do well. His motivation is to be a good chief of police, but at the same time protect people. And so suddenly, when he learns about man against nature and the shark, he's saying, I'm worried about that. Now we've got a change bomb. A child is bitten and killed. And now the pressure and response continues to build. It built up to a brink where they have to make some really critical choices. And then finally, you end up with a resolution. Now, obviously, with your premise, it may be for you. You may not want to publish it other than maybe to some writer friends to get their opinions, because you don't want to give away your story. But these are the steps that if you walk through, I really think, and be thinking all the time about conflict, and on these steps and your various stages of archetypes of conflict, I think you can really put together a absolutely super story. And I think that's really important. The other thing I wanted to just briefly mention is that another example I picked one of my books, Long Walk Home. That's a story. It's a steady state. My hero and his daughter go to New York. His daughter's been living with him for 6 to 9 months, and they want to do something. So he said, I'd like to take you to Manhattan. We'll go see some plays. And oh, Dad, that's wonderful. I just knew it would be great. So my character is Colonel Zach Kelly, as I mentioned earlier. And his motivation is critical in that he really wants to create a relationship with his daughter. Well, they go to New York, and they find out that there's a problem with, she lives on one end of the Staten Island Ferry on the island, and all of a sudden, the change bomb, there's a conflict crisis, and believe it or not, the Staten Island Ferry is kidnapped, is taken, and all of a sudden, my hero finds out that his daughter was on the ferry. Now, here's pressure. Just think about the pressure that would be on him to try to figure out. He's trying to find what happened to Laura. There may be some problem with the mafia. So he's got to respond to all those sorts of things. And so this gave me an opportunity to work through kind of that steady state and help the readers learn and be pulled in to my story, learn about what's happening, what it means. So I think that's probably enough, Kathy, to kind of start with this and help our readers, listeners, understand a little bit about the steady state.
That's excellent. Those are all great points for starting short stories or a novel. I think you really broaden the subject area there. We do have a few questions.
Okay, great.
One's from a beginning writer who wanted to know, should they start with an outline or not?
That's an incredibly interesting point. And I have a number of friends who use outline all the time. I have not done that, and it's because if I'm going to sit down and write an outline, then I think to myself, why don't I sit down and start the story? But what happened, I got to tell you, what happened to me, and it's happened a couple of times. My first book, I had a great first third of my book, and things were happening. And then I was having trouble with the middle. But then I had a great something on the end, So I had my first part, I had my second part, but I didn't have it tied together. And there is a cost of business of not doing an outline. And some of my friends who do outlines just can't believe the guys that do it on your own. But I think I get almost bored doing an outline, and I'm better off just starting writing. But it's really interesting. I know lots of times I'll be sitting there and looking off into space, and my wife looks at me and she said, "Don, what are you doing?" I'll say, "Oh, I'm writing." And lots of times I may not write an outline, but I'm kind of working with it up in my head. And that way I can kind of play with it and move forward. And there comes a time that you have to get it all down and get started on it. And remember, the other thing that I always tell my friends is that writing is rewriting. If you're going to try to write a quality short story, I'm here to tell you, you're going to do it a number of times to make it, particularly if you want it to be just right. And that's the exciting part about it. And then if you put your time in, this is an opportunity to be rewarded for it. So why not give it a try? Because I've been with this group 10 years and have submitted some stories that have received award. And it's terrific because they do reward you. And also, these are your publishers and a lot of people that can help you along the way. So if you're starting or you're kind of at the first step or second step, why not give it a try? It's a golden opportunity, and I hope many of my friends do.
Thank you. Yes, we have another question. The difference between writing a short story as opposed to a novel. What about the pace in a short story? For this particular competition, it's a limit of 5,000 words. So
Right.
You want to talk about pace?
Absolutely. I think pace is critical. I think that when you start, I have a number of friends. Lee Childs was a memoir for me, a mentor for me when I was with international thriller writers. They had a debut group, and he told us several times to get going on it. He said, a lot of people, I think the biggest problem I see in addition to the conflict is the demon of backstory. And Lee's point was, and I've always tried to listen to it and believe it, is that don't worry your readers unless they have to know what's needed to make sense of that particular section. You don't need to give them a whole lot of backstory, because what happens when you do that, you lose your pacing. And as soon as you lose your pacing, you lose your readers, and that, I think, is incredibly important. And it's certainly important in a novel, but I think it's just as important in a short story, because you have to keep your readers. If you lose your reader, then that's not going to work for you.
That's very true. It's also true if you're submitting your manuscript to a publisher. If they don't get me in the first paragraph, I'm hard pressed to read further.
Right.
So a lot of times it may be better to start with the action and then go back to bring us forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've learned that lesson time and time again, that you have to grab your reader, whether it be an agent, an editor, a reader, or whatever, you need to grab them. People usually, I've heard so many times that people, when they're picking up a book from an author they don't know, or are looking at a short story, for example, they will take a look at, for the book, they'll take a look at the cover, and then they'll look at the back, and then they'll move forward and look at the first page. And if it doesn't catch them by that time, you've lost them. And I think a short story sometimes is even harder. With a novel, you may have a little bit more time, but you sure don't have much time in that short story to get something going. Absolutely.
That's exactly right. One last question.
Great.
Someone has asked, do you use a critique group, and do you recommend that?
Oh, I do. I absolutely do. I was so lucky. My wife and I lived in Perry County, which is a little bit west of Harrisburg, for almost 20 years. And in 2004, we started our little critique group. And it was I'll never forget, it was the Wednesday night critique group. And we decided to call it that so even readers would know when it was held. And so we had a group, and none of us had really gotten very far. But we had that critique group until I left Perry County a few years ago. And I think it's very valuable. Having said that, critiquing is an art, just like everything else is. And what I hate to see is critiquers that either say something like, "Oh, your mother would love this," or try to be almost saying how much bad stuff they can find. When I'm critiquing, I always try to say something good. Hey, I kind of like this story. Here's some of the good stuff, but I think you have a real problem here. And then wrap it up by saying, if you improve that, I think the story will really be great. So I always try to remember, say something good about it, then tell them what the problem is. If you gloss over that, you're not helping them. But then try to have something good at the end so they can say, "Oh, okay." And I hear critique groups that don't do that. And you can almost ruin a writer if you hit them really hard, and it's so unfair. So you got to give them something to cling to, then tell them what the problem is, and then summarize that. That's what I would recommend. But I love critique groups, and I'm always involved with them.
Well, thank you, Don. We're just about out of time. You've hit a lot of important points. I'd like to remind the viewers, we will have additional short story writing workshops from Don Helin in the future. There are links posted in the Facebook feed, and will also be on the YouTube channel when this video is released on the Zoom Into Books YouTube channel. So you can enter the Next Generation Short Story Awards if you like. All the links are there. And if you'd like more information, or if you would like to contact Don Helin, his website is also posted there, so you can contact him with questions. His books are also available on Amazon, headlinebooks.com, and donhelin.com. So Don, thank you very much. We look forward to
it was wonderful. And I think next one, I'd like to start to talk a little bit about character, because once you get started, if you haven't got a character that people like and can understand and see some potential in, you're not going to go very far. So we'll try to deal with character the next go round, and then maybe plot, setting, and a little dialogue or something like that. But things that will help you write that short story that is going to catch some attention.
That's great. Thank you so much, Don. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on Zoom Into Books today. And we will see you all again soon.
Okay. Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.